Hirabayashi-san, thanks for taking the time to talk with me about Resident Evil Remastered.
Actually, let me thank you. It's great that you guys are showing so much interest in a game of this fashion, which is, in a manner of speaking, quote-unquote, just an HD remake. It is special to us, and I'm glad that you guys are treating it with the weight that it probably deserves.
Yeah, personally a huge fan of it, and was very excited when I found out that we were going to be covering this, and the fact that one of my favorite games from the Gamecube is actually going to be updated for modern consoles is awesome.
It's definitely one of my favorite games as well.
So why is now the right time for an update of the remake?
Yeah, so this actually is something we've kept in our proverbial back pocket at Capcom for years. It's something we've wanted to do. We've wanted to take this, essentially the best version of this game, brush it up, make it even prettier and even more worthwhile. The thing is, it's something we had tried a few times. When it comes to a title like this, there's a lot of ways to do it wrong, and probably only one or two good ways to do it right. And the tech wasn't always there. It didn't always turn out the way that we had intended, and it just kind of kept getting waylaid and put to the side. And we all remembered we wanted to try and take a stab at it again later. And fairly recently, Mr. Kobayashi, who was a producer in the series and is now an executive at Capcom, said, hey, what about that whole RE remaster that we were talking about? Should we try and light that up again? And they took some time, they did a tech inquiry into it, and it looked like, hey, our tech is up to snuff this time. Now's our chance. We can finally do this thing that we've wanted to do for so long.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the process of updating both the character models and 3D models and also the backgrounds?
Talking about the characters. We'll start by talking about the characters, and I'll kind of sum it up by saying that the Gamecube version actually had some really, really high poly count models for the time. So geometrically speaking, we actually didn't need to do anything to these characters. All the changes that you'll see, and they are significant, are with the textures themselves. We increased the resolution. We added normal mapping, which was not even a thing back then. We updated all the lighting and the shaders, which once again was not a thing back in the day when the game was originally made. So all these things combined to make it look a lot better, but geometrically they're actually identical to what you had seen before in the Gamecube. So that's the characters. Another aspect of the game, of course, is the effects. Put simply, what we did here, we basically just remade them all. These are the sort of things that are so dependent upon resolution that we couldn't just take what was already there and just upgrade the resolution. It's something that we were better off basically recreating, of course, keeping a really close eye on the original effects because we didn't want to step out of the bounds. We wanted to make sure we were staying true to the original source material. And finally, there's the environments, and this was, frankly, and you may have already guessed, the hardest part of putting this game together. Basically, the way the original Gamecube game was put together, as well as they took all of these various cuts, these various camera angles and rooms, 1,000 of them or more in total, and they created them on a case-by-case basis, one at a time. They had very different needs, very different lighting, and things like that. So we really had no choice, but this time to treat it the same way, to go in one at a time, figure out the pieces, parts that comprise these scenes, and figure out the best way to make adjustments efficiently and make them look good. So we've done everything, in some of the more orthodox cases, we've just taken the 2D image that was already there and fiddled with the resolution and kind of upgraded in that way. That's the more orthodox method. In some cases, we added some polygonal elements that were not present in the original just because it looks better and is more suited to this resolution. And in a few cases, we actually basically recreated the entire environment in polygons and just redid it. So there's kind of three methods that we took, once again, depending, very dependent on the nature of each individual cut, each individual room, handled on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, one of those rooms you showed me before was the really iconic room that was new to the remake, wasn't in the original, which is the sort of descent into the area where you fight the first Crimson Head, or not the first Crimson Head, but the main Crimson Head. Why did that room need so much new attention?
Yeah, so that was a very special case. I think one thing we discovered as we were putting the game together is there were certain areas, generally speaking, where there's a lot of dynamic lighting happening, where the 2D backgrounds and the 3D elements overlaid on top of that don't quite mesh all that well. I think they look kind of a little off. So we knew we would need some special attention to that particular room. The problem was we were very reluctant at first, I think, to go full polygon, just because we didn't want to kind of ruin the atmosphere, so to speak, and the kind of sense of dread and their kind of sense of filth in that room and in that area. We thought that polygons sometimes can tend to come off looking almost sort of plasticky and too clean. That's something we wanted to avoid. In the end, we figured we were up to the challenge, and that maintaining that sense of dread inherent in the lighting was going to take precedent, and we just did everything we could to maintain the original atmosphere, just recreate it and make it look really pretty. And I suppose it would only be natural after hearing that I would be asked a question, well, hey, why not just redo the whole game in polygons? And I'm glad you asked. I will answer that for you. Basically, it comes down to a matter of taste. You see differences in the way, once again, in the way that a full fully rendered polygonal area looks compared to a pre-rendered. It's a very small difference. It's minor, but what game is more deserving of that kind of attention to small detail than this one? So we really erred on the side of caution in areas where we could preserve the 2D backgrounds. We made every effort to do so because they were created with a very specific kind of feel in mind, and we just wanted to maintain that as much as humanly possible. So it would have gone against our mission statement, so to speak, to go full polygon with it.
Okay, I have another question about that, but before I get to it, since we were talking about Crimson Heads, and I have you here, one, Crimson Heads are terrible. They're awful, terrible things, but how the hell do they work? Are they on a timer? Is it random? Is it dependent on how many times you go in the room before they turn? Like, can you answer this for me? It's been plaguing me for a long time. They're terrifying. I needed an answer.
That's a secret. And then
it's been 12 years.
Then you wouldn't be scared of it anymore. The more you know about horror, the less horrifying it is.
Okay, all right.
But it sounds like you have some ideas that could lead you down the right path.
All right, one more Crimson Head question. Are Crimson Heads halfway between a zombie and a licker from Resident Evil 2? Are they like the halfway point?
So basically, we consider the Crimson Head to be a variant zombie type. Okay. The licker has gone full creature. It's in a whole different zone. Whereas we think of the Crimson Head as a regular zombie that's down to a whole case of Red Bull, basically.
Oh, okay, all right, gotcha.
But to look at it a little more seriously, and it's the lickers were in 2, as you said, and then the Crimson Heads actually came as far as us creating the games later. So it sounds like I'm kind of explaining something after the fact.
Okay.
So it's a little hard, but the way I look at it is this way. So you have regular zombies, and then at some point what the T-virus did to the lickers is it caused some sort of mutation and change to them physically, which caused them to be more creature-like and have the long tongue and the split brain, etc. Whereas the Crimson Head was subject to a different kind of mutation that just made it a more ferocious zombie. So they share a common ancestor, so to speak, but they've gone off on different evolutionary branches. If it helps, think of one as a chimpanzee and one as a human, for instance. They have a common zombie ancestor, but they've gone in different directions, evolutionarily speaking, after that.
Okay, I think that helps. I feel like you were hinting at it, but do you think that for as crisp as this remaster version looks, that there's something to be said for sort of the Vaseline on the lens of the original that kind of blended everything together? Do you think that having it look too sharp might kind of change the mood to something that's a little less, dread-inducing?
Yeah, that is definitely something that I am kind of fearful of. I didn't want to go too far in one direction. We've been really concerned about that. I even thought, initially at one point we were going to have to do a post effect over the whole entire game that kind of blurs things up a little, muddies them up. But I mean, at the core of things, we're looking at the difference between old picture tube CRT TVs versus HD TVs. There's only so much we can do without it accidentally looking bad on HD TVs. The whole environment really has kind of changed in the way people play games. So what you'll notice, I think, when you play the game is we didn't quite bring everything out of focus, but we do have a little bit of kind of snowy, staticky kind of noise running in a filter over the proceedings to maintain that sort of analog kind of feel to it. But it was definitely something we were really concerned with throughout development, just to make sure we have that balance between the old and the new. So ultimately, when it came time to make any sort of decision during development, when it comes to visuals, how far should we go in one direction or the other? Should we, for example, go with some sort of filter that puts everything out of focus? The one key core concept that I always went back to make this decision for me was, is it necessary to survival horror? Does this visual choice make sense in the realm of horror? And in that sense, I started thinking about, for example, the out-of-focus thing. That didn't seem like a really horror-ish thing to do, whereas the idea of kind of the TV noise or static over top everything, that really does kind of tie into horror, because I think it sort of subconsciously kind of puts you in a nervous place. So once again, with all these decisions like this, does it work for horror? And if the answer was yes, we did it. And if the answer was no, or it's not essential, we didn't do it.
Well, the visuals, that's one unified thing. The game is only going to look one way when it comes out. But one thing that players have an option for is the control scheme, which is new. You can play the original tank controls, or you can play with a new, more modern. The player will go, or the character will go in the direction that you want them to go, just by pressing the stick in that direction. Was that difficult to implement, or was it actually a pretty simple, just mechanically, pretty simple process of changing that over?
So, on a technical level, it was actually pretty easy to implement. I mean, we would have had the technology to do that in the Gamecube version, had we so chosen. The hard part for us was not the tech aspect of it. It was, once again, measuring it against that yardstick that is horror.
Right.
Is this appropriate for survival horror? Is it not? It's something that we communicated a great deal about within the team. And in fact, we've only recently settled on what I feel are the final controls for the game. When we first started implementing this, the game actually became kind of a different beast entirely. You were able to run around wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted, at a very high rate of speed. The entire pace of the game kind of changed, and that's when I got kind of nervous because I realized we were skewing away from that core concept of horror. So we've gone through, once again, like everything else in the game, room by room, area by area, making decisions. At what point when you push the stick, at what point does that transition from a walk to a run? Do we need to lower the speed in this area for reason X, Y, or Z? It's all very subtle. It's all stuff you probably wouldn't even notice when you're controlling the game, but it was all very deliberate. If the game is played at too high a tempo, if it's too fast-paced, it starts to feel like a traditional action game. It's not survival horror anymore. It's not what we wanted to make. So we had to go through and do a lot of fine-tuning.
Will the character's run speed vary depending on the context?
Yeah, so actually, the character's walking and running speed is something that is universal throughout the game, that's calculated by the game engine. Where we did make some adjustments, is exactly, once again, at what point do you stop walking and start running? How easy do we make that? In previous iterations of the game, of course, you had a run button, but that's two things. So you could run in the old game as well, but that's two things you're doing at once. You're using two thumbs to do that. Psychologically, for whatever reason, it's such a minor thing, but it's a much bigger hurdle. It's a bigger deal to hit two buttons. We feel that a lot of people probably walked in the original more than running because it just felt natural to control with the D-pad. If you have an analog stick now, if you just jam that all the way down, you can run whenever and wherever you please. And it still almost feels like it skews too far in that direction, but we made some really careful and clever adjustments there so that you weren't constantly just running around and playing the game in a way that it wasn't necessarily intended to be played.
And then with that kind of control scheme, does controlling and shifting from screen to screen, does that end up kind of feeling like maybe like Devil May Cry, where you're pressing in one direction as the camera changes, and as long as you're holding that direction, they keep running, and then you have to readjust?
Yeah, you will notice that kind of thing. It's kind of hard to avoid in a game like this with fixed cameras. There are some solutions that we thought about that we had considered implementing, but we didn't want to go so far in that direction. I think of usability. We didn't want to go through and redo the control scheme and then the camera angles and everything for every single room. When ultimately, that moment of confusion when the camera cuts is actually something that could be seen as very deliberate to begin with. So kind of keeping you on your toes as you change cuts is kind of an important aspect of the game as well. I don't know that our solution was the perfect or most elegant one. I don't know if there is a perfect solution, but it's the one that we felt best served the idea of it being a traditional horror game.
Can you tell me a little bit about the decision, because the original version's in 4:3 aspect ratio, and you're accommodating 16:9 now. But when you showed me a little bit of that, it's zoomed in, and there's a very very slow panning effect, which changes the mood of the game substantially. How'd you land on the decision to kind of have the camera move with the character rather than just I don't know what the other option would be actually, but what went into that decision?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is there really is no other way to handle something like that, since the original assets are created with a 4:3 standard TV aspect ratio in mind. And you're right in that scrolling, as much as we tried to balance that and make it have the least possible effect on the atmosphere, that effect is there. There's not much we can do. We minimized it as best we could. We couldn't get rid of it. So, did we do it the best way that's available to us, or a better way? I think we did. Is it perfect? Probably not, but I don't know if there's a perfect way to really do that. The game itself was designed and stands out really well as a 4:3 game. And if you want the pure experience, I would recommend you play that version of it. We didn't want to just include that because people are very used to widescreen games now. Once again, our whole goal here is to recreate the original game in the prettiest package we could. We're not trying to create a new Resident Evil, so to speak. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to wide versus standard aspect ratio. So it's there as an option. We feel it looks pretty good. Does a pretty decent job in most cases of replicating the atmosphere of the completely static camera. But both options are there for you to try. So. One thing to keep in mind here too, because you used the word zoom, and I think I may have used it in my response. We don't actually zoom on the original assets. We're actually chopping the top and bottom off, rather than taking an existing 720p image and stretching it. If anything, the 4:3 has a 720p image and it's kind of compressed a bit. It's more like that version is zoomed out rather than 16:9 is zoomed in a manner of speaking.
So as a last question for this chat, and it's a totally hypothetical question, but is all the time and the hard work spent by your team, working on this remaster version of Resident Evil, would this experience hypothetically help if the team ever decided to remake Resident Evil 2 or 3? Would this be useful information, a useful experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a minefield, isn't it? The simple answer is yes. I mean, would this be useful to us if we were to embark on a remake of 2 or 3? Sure, it would be really good experience. It'd be really good know-how that we've built up. If we were to go that exact route with a remake of 2 or 3, if it were to exist. There's a lot of hypotheticals here kind of layered on top of each other. There's another alternate scenario wherein, once again, purely hypothetical, we wanted to do a remake of 2 or 3, but the users didn't want kind of a 2D based game like we have now, and they wanted more of a 3D approach. Then would it be terribly useful? Probably not, because then we'd be looking at making an entirely different kind of game in a different way. So it really depends not only on the potential hypothetical existence of remakes of those, but what kind of game they would be. We've certainly built up a lot of know-how, but it depends on what we would want to do with it, whether or not it would be particularly useful in any given circumstance.
Well, I guess I can just continue to quietly hope and look forward for more news on that. But until then, very excited to check out Remaster again. I'll be playing through it right away. So thanks for taking the time to chat.
You've got a lot of sharp questions in there. He hopes that he was able to answer them appropriately.
Absolutely.
To kind of do a lot of thinking in real time. Yeah.